So this one will be a lovely, intimate chat of us, and I think it's really great that we heard a lot of policy in the last session, and you two are two practitioners who are actually living that policy and making it happen. So for the viewers who don't know you as CRNI members that you are, Emma is the CEO of Recreate, newly joined Recreate, I understand. And you have quite an interesting background, both in managing arts development, formerly at the Access Arts Centre in Aoibheann, and also an executive MBA from Trinity College Business School. So I'm really looking forward to hearing how you marry those two very different interests. And of course, Aoibheann O'Brien, we know from FoodCloud as the co-founder and partnership director of this award-winning enterprise. And I was delighted to read that FoodCloud is now being used in the UK and Central Europe and Australia. So it's a huge success for yourself and for Ireland, of course. And Aoibheann is the recipient of the Social Entrepreneurs of Ireland Impact Award and Green Entrepreneur of the Year for 2014. So two highly acclaimed women here to talk about how you are making it happen regarding circular economy. So maybe, Emma, you could start out by just talking about how you create and sustain circular jobs in the Recreate Centre.
Yeah, so lovely to meet you all, and thanks for having us, Cara. So I joined 8 months ago, so I've come into a social enterprise that has 20 staff, and the breakdown of that, interestingly, is there's 5 core roles that are funded from Public CSP, and in some ways that's the lifeblood in terms of employment for us. We have a weekend staff of artists who are on a contract basis when we have particular projects. And then we have a number of TUS and CE workers, so up to 10. So at the moment we would have a workforce of 20. But I have to say my head has been exploding in the last hour. Myself and Aoibheann met yesterday to talk about policy and saying, when you're a practitioner and on the ground, nearly policy is a luxury. And even just spending a couple of hours last night giving myself time to look at the strategies and the policies, and on the last hour listening to the other panelists, I am scribbling already, saying we are sitting in some ways, Recreate, on a gold mine of other job creation. So very simply, for those who might know about Recreate, we have a warehouse of wonders that we call. So we take materials from companies, and we have traditionally used them as art materials. So the materials have been used for art purposes. But there's been part of me in the last hour thinking, why on earth are we not using those materials as job creation? So what creatively could we be creating from these materials that would create other roles, other jobs? We have 280 suppliers that we get our materials from. Why on earth could we not elevate, say, our TUS program and run it as a 2-year program, where in fact we could then connect people who are long-term unemployed with our suppliers? So it's already, I'm kind of trying to think innovatively and creatively around what other jobs and roles could we be creating. So rather than just being a centre for creativity, should we be thinking around creatively how we can generate new roles? So just even 60 minutes, that has just kind of landed as a little eureka moment, I suppose, for myself, as we develop a new strategy for Recreate over the next 5 years.
Yeah. At the moment,
pardon?
Do you have any ideas at the moment for what kind of jobs might be created out of Recreate, or is it still kind of
No, there's a few. Obviously, we have talked about expanding to Cork. We were meant to, pre-COVID, have opened a new hub in Cork. So that would have created new roles, because it would have been a sister project to ourselves. We're in the middle of we have applied to another social enterprise called the Bike Hub. And if they get that funding, then that would create a new role for us around having a curious consultant on site, and maybe testing a fleet of Deliveroo style cyclists who would in fact be delivering our materials. I think we could do with kind of other marketing roles, but also as designers. And do we then look at the traveller community, and where we've got these materials, and perhaps there could be a return to creating new crafts? So you spoke about crafts earlier on. So there are ideas from designers to drivers to marketeers. And also, I suppose, from my background, like you mentioned, in the art sector, I think there is a massive role for people in the creative and art sector. This idea of what role can the arts play and how we adapt to climate change. And I think that's a massively untapped market. I would love to see us elevating our artists as entrepreneurs, as creative entrepreneurs, where perhaps they are developing their own programs or new enterprises or new inventions through access with our materials. So I see kind of two or three things are really springing already in the last 60 minutes.
That's great. I want that job, curiosity consultant. That's a great title. Oh,
I want that job.
Yeah, Aoibheann, technology. We talked about it in the last session about how jobs are actually at risk as we move to a more digital society. But for FoodCloud, technology has been so important. So can you talk a little bit about the role of technology and how it contributes to the work that you do?
Yeah, so FoodCloud redistributes food from the food industry to the charity sector, and the technology element is the retail solution. So the stores upload the details of what they have that is surplus, and it sends out a notification to the local charity, and then they go and pick up the donation from their local store. But we also have warehouses where we take stuff from the supply chain, and we have warehouse management systems and things there as well. So I suppose the technology part has been the driver of retail. So it's been so like donation at a local level was happening before, but it was very ad hoc, and a lot of the kind of big companies were kind of reluctant to get involved because they didn't have kind of traceability or kind of oversight of what was happening. So I suppose, and KPI and data on what was actually happening, traceability for food safety, all of that kind of stuff. So for us, the food donation has been happening for years. There's nothing new about that, but by using technology, you could accelerate it and make it more mainstream. So like say one donation you can manage like without technology. Maybe you could manage like 20 donations or 100, but like on a daily basis, we might have in Ireland, we would have about 500 donations happening daily, small, local, from kind of Letterkenny to Tramore and Waterford. And there's no way you could do that without technology. So that's kind of been really interesting. And then in the UK and internationally, food redistribution again was done, but the retail level was always hard to crack because of all those reasons. So we work with other NGOs internationally that have the warehouses side of things covered, but they use our technology so that they can work with retailers. So like I suppose technology has been the complete key to enabling that whole process. And then I suppose in terms of the overall within FoodCloud, what we're excited about in an Irish context is that you have your warehouse with your suppliers, and then you can work right through to retail. But one kind of new piece of technology that has been really interesting in the UK, there's an organization called Olio that does consumer level food sharing. So like, you're a person, Tesco would say we've got this amount free available, and they'd collect it. So we've actually now started to work with Olio in the UK. So basically, like if Tesco have surplus food, it first goes to charity and community groups through our technology, but if they're not available to collect it, it then goes to Olio, where they have food rescue heroes, and they're individuals that can use it within their communities or for themselves. Mm-hmm. So that means that you've gotten like every opportunity to not waste that food, which we think is really cool. And like Olio are kind of looking to come to Ireland. They're already here in a small way, but like that kind of partnership and working with technology is really the key to the kind of tricky stuff that you're only doing on a really ad hoc basis without technology.
Yeah, wow, that's great to hear. So I think we have 28 people viewing, and I understand that if you have questions, if the audience has questions, that you can even come on screen in these breakout sessions. I think you share your video. If not, then do feel free to ask questions within the Q&A for this session, and we will try and get to as many questions as possible in the next 20 minutes or so that we have together. But while we're waiting for people to ask their own questions to both of you, we heard a lot about policies coming down from Europe and changes to Irish policy around circular economy. So just to ask both of you, and we'll start with Emma, are you optimistic about where policy is going, both in Ireland and in Europe, around social and circular economy, or pessimistic, and why?
No, I think optimistic if you have the vision to switch it into something practical, and I think that was one of the notes that was in the Q&A earlier on, is that stitched up thinking. I don't think there has never, well, there hasn't been a time that there has been this momentum, and there hasn't been a time, I think, where people are thinking more curiously about what's possible, and new partnerships and new ways of working. So there seems to be an appetite for people to be in the business of wanting to do business with lots of different other types of people. So I think if we weren't going to be positive at this point in time, then we're a little bit doomed. But I think it's the idea now of, even for Recreate and myself as leading the organization, how do we flip that policy into actionable things? How do we flip that policy so that the staff and team are interested? Where can we see the gaps that we can see, okay, well, where can Recreate have real value and real impact? And it's a particularly brilliant time, say for myself, brand new in and new board, and tasked with developing a new strategy, and as part of that means revisiting what our mission is. So where are we going to go? So even starting to look at the policy and be thinking, okay, well, how will that inform our future work and our social mission? So when I'm very optimistic and in fact quite excited by that, because in some ways it's like trying to flip those words and those Article 2.1 or 0.7.4. What does it mean in terms of real programming, in terms of job creation, in terms of having impact? Who else can we partner with? So it is a potential gold mine as far as I'm concerned. And I think the big thing now, to one of the other panelists' point earlier on, is looking at stitching them together, not necessarily looking at one policy in isolation. So my job over the next couple of weeks and months now, even having been part of this conference and speaking to Claire from CRNI in the last couple of days and Aoibheann last night, is to spend time now with the documents myself and as a team, and our key stakeholders, and see what can we do with it. And as we develop our new strategy, where can Recreate be positioned and where can we add the most value? So, for example, hearing the reuse, the repair, the recycle, we are in the business of reuse, but we are in the business of creative reuse. And I have so rarely heard or seen that term. So if that's something that we can further develop through policy. So how do I make sure that creative reuse really sits in that reuse? How do we further campaign for that kind of work? And what does it mean to creatively reuse something? So for me, as a new CEO and one new in the social enterprise sector, and one who's new in the social circular economy sector, those policies are in some ways they're a lifeline if I choose to use them for Recreate. So yeah.
Yeah, and this new appetite for collaboration, I think Aoibheann talked about it too. Is that a result of us being all locked in our homes, looking to connect with people via Zoom, or what do you think is driving that?
Well,
I think
no, absolutely, Aoibheann, go on.
No, so I just had a bit of a reset and for people, and just and partnerships to go, working together is the only way to go. The problem of climate change is too big for us to take on kind of individually or as organizations. So maybe it's that, and maybe it's just the desire to have chats with people, new people that are outside of your own little bubble. But yeah, so I would be positive too. I suppose one of the things that we have found challenging, and we need to do more work in terms of seeing what supports are out there, is in the world of digital transformation and social enterprise. One of the challenges is that there is a huge demand for people who are technologists of all kinds, from product managers to developers to engineers. Like, it's just like your Googles and all of those will tell you that they put so much effort into recruitment and looking after their employees. And for social enterprises, it is really, really difficult to compete with that. So that is a big challenge with digital transformation when you're a social enterprise. And in Ireland, when you're a social enterprise, you're normally a registered charities. And, there is that expectation of limited salaries within the charity sector. So that has been a big challenge for us as we've tried to scale our technology, being able to attract and retain staff that are strong in various digital skills has been really difficult and will continue to be. So, and like in our case, we are working with like the likes of Tesco and Aldi, and all of those large, they're not, we can't have a mediocre platform. It has to be really, really good. And that is a big challenge for social enterprises in the digital space. And, I said to Emma yesterday, like, we are guilty of not necessarily having spent time on all of the policies and supports out there that are available. And like, maybe that is something off the back of this conference and, chatting to each other, that it's something that if we're serious about digital transformation in social enterprise, we need to be, calling out that those roles need to be supported with funding.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Emma, I think I muted you there just because there was a bit of feedback. Yeah, great. You can.
Yeah. I think the other thing, Tara, you're asking about, the power of partnership. I mean, that hasn't been for me, that hasn't been a COVID response. I suppose that has been part of my methodology from when I worked in Access for the last 15 years. And I think particularly now in the social enterprise space, like, we are not interested in competing with other enterprises. And in my first 6 months as CEO, I've been out chatting to different social enterprises and asking them, saying, are you a competitor? So the Rediscovery Centre, right? Are you a competitor, or are there places where, that we can synergize, or have we unique spaces that we've got our own lanes? And I think having those kind of conversations are really important. And also particularly eking out and searching for potential collaborators with other social enterprises, whether they are emerging startups or whether they're more established. So for example, we are setting up a new partnership with Attention Attire, and they work in the area of textiles, and our warehouse is full of textiles, and our creative director has a background in fashion design. So are we going to be competing with Attention Attire, or are we trying to find a way of developing something together and potentially new roles from that? So we've been lucky enough now to secure funding for a training program, working on that together. And if there is something in that, then that could be something that's rolled out and potentially other roles. So for me, partnership makes good business sense. And even as we are growing for Recreate, the technology bit, I've just scribbled down with Aoibheann, chat to her about the technology. That was not anything that Recreate needed to be involved in, pre-COVID. But now, because the warehouse was closed, we had to get materials out to our members, or we would have been decimated as a social enterprise. So now suddenly we got a trial version of new software for scheduling our drivers as they go around the country to different schools and youth projects and whatever. So now there's a conversation with Aoibheann around, okay, well, what is that technology there? So we don't have the luxury, as Aoibheann says, of filling every single role. We don't have fundraising managers and business development managers and research managers. So there's a need to share that learning and capacity so that we all potentially can grow even more. So for me, it's a key business thing to partner.
Yeah, there's an exciting opportunity. It's great to see Recreate going so national too, because it would be a shame if you were just restricted to Dublin. There's a couple great questions in here, but I'll start with the first one on the role of women, and I'm sure both of you can answer this. So Emer says women have been disproportionately impacted in the job market by COVID. I think we all recognize that. So what do you see the skills or training opportunities specifically for women and funding regarding reskilling in this sector? And jobs in the circular economy around that. Do you see a kind of a special role for women in this area?
I have to admit, I hadn't. If I'm very candid, Aoibheann, had that crossed your mind at all?
Well, we're working with 600 charities across Ireland, and I suppose, like, in terms of feedback from what's kind of happening in communities across the country, I suppose there hasn't been that much of a narrative and a discussion like there has been in the UK around the impact, the social impact of COVID. Like, there hasn't been, like, I don't know if you've been following Marcus Rashford and Man United star, who's kind of put the government under serious pressure in the UK around school meals, supporting single families, all of that kind of stuff. And we're kind of surprised that there hasn't been that much attention on the impact of COVID on families, especially single parents in Ireland. And like, I suppose what we're seeing is in terms of food provision, that there's a massive increase in demand for that level of support for people. So I suppose that's from the social context of what's happening, and we're just kind of surprised it hasn't been talked about, to the extent that we are doing, and we've just got it funded, a piece of research on the social impact of COVID-19 around food, and what has that meant for families. But in terms of job creation, and particularly women, like, we're about 60-40 women, but I think that's unconscious bias, actually. So I'm not sure if that's because there's different roles available. We wouldn't really see it that much in terms of an issue that's coming up. Like, we would have CSP funding, we would have TUS and CE participants, but a lot of our TUS and CE participants are younger men, actually. So to be honest, we haven't seen, I suppose, the employment inclusion. We've actually seen more representation through TUS and CE of young guys who are kind of 22, 23 and still haven't got a job on their CV. That's what we're seeing in terms of candidates that are coming to us for roles.
Yeah, and interesting as you bring that up, there's nearly like a split in Recreate. So all the creative team, all the artists, whatever, all female, and then on the other side of the house, all the warehouse, all the TUS, all the CE are male, and I mean, maybe perhaps they're traditional roles or not, and then a mix in terms of our artist panel. But yeah, no, interesting. I hadn't quite thought of that impact.
Yeah. Emerge just followed up, and she asked that question is because in Northern Ireland, a she shed has been launched to support training women and things like upcycling and joinery. And actually, where I live here in Bray, we've just formed a women's shed that's going to look at, you know, things like that too. So I guess there's a movement of trying to train women specifically in these areas that they wouldn't typically engage in as much. Roger has a couple questions here. So the first one being, do you see increased demand for circular economy and TUS and other employment progression initiatives post-COVID with possible higher unemployment numbers? And then his follow-up question is, and what new or additional supports from government, et cetera, would you like to help facilitate these increased numbers in your organization?
Who do you want to answer that? Well, Emma, do you want to?
Yeah, just briefly. Yes, I do see an increase in warehouse as Recreate grows, as we get more materials in, as we expand those. That's a natural part. If we open new hubs, then we absolutely need additional warehouse staff and TUS staff. But what I am exploring with the team at the moment is around. We have since last year, Cara, we have a new social inclusion officer for the first time, Liz Smith, and she is an artist as well. So I think having a young social enterprise with a dedicated social inclusion officer, who is also an artist, bringing that kind of creative lens to social inclusion. So we've been having some fantastic discussions around, does social inclusion mean that you're bringing in, 20 of your TUS workers, every year for 12 months and off they go, and are you essentially massaging the live registered numbers? Or are we, as Recreate, interested in transformational social inclusion, which means, can we really create roles? And if we can, then we need to look honestly about the TUS workers and what we're offering them. So do they get a terrific 12-month experience with us? Yes, but have we been able to create significant number of roles afterwards? No. Have there been a number, 3 or 4, who started as TUS participants 7 or 8 years ago and now transitioned and they are in leadership roles within Recreate, and that's fantastic. Our head of operations started as a TUS worker. Our warehouse manager started as a TUS worker. But I'm interested maybe in unpacking that and linking it to our suppliers. So for example, if we are talking about ourselves being a curious and a creative company, is there a TUS program alongside another accelerator year, like a maverick year, where they learn about mindset and sustainability and confidence and mental health and strategy, and if you combine that 2 year working actively within Recreate, but this other stuff, like you were fast tracking what maybe have been missed in their education or their opportunities since they were young, if you could put those 2 together, then you really could nearly have a Q mark. So my dream is nearly to have a Q mark where you would have these companies that we get our material materials from, that in one day, in a couple of years' time, they might say, well, we want to hire, a Recreate Maverick person. They've gone through Recreate's 2-year program, training program, and we really want to hire that worker. That's where my head is now going in terms of social inclusion. And what would it take to I suppose level the playing field? What would it take for people, from disadvantaged areas or haven't had the same opportunity? What would it take to level the playing field? And just a 12-month TOOS program on its own, for me, is not radical enough. So we're exploring that, and that's what Liz is looking at. So transformational social inclusion.
Yeah. Aoibheann, what do you have to add to that? What supports do you think we need?
Well, we have TOOS and CE and CSP, and I have to say the CSP program is so valuable. It's multi-year, it's like part funding of salaries. It is just gives us that security on those core staff, and if we could have more of the type of CSP program, that would be so valuable. And that does have the social inclusion part as very much part of it. And post-COVID, when we kind of assess the impact on unemployment, I'd love to see the CSP program expanded, because that's long-term sustainable jobs. Like it's not a 1-year program. We have CSP since people involved since 2014. They probably retire with us. It's just been fantastic. So that kind of program, where it's multi-year, you can rely on it, is just so valuable. And I know everybody who has CSP funding is like, it's like gold, and it just is that core funding that's required to sustain employment. So I would love to see like an expansion of the CSP program. And I think a lot of TOOS participants could actually then have more serious job security, and it's not just a 20-hour a week for 1 year. So yeah, that's what I'd love to see.
Yeah, this challenge where you're going to always be competing against like the big multinationals for talent, and that they'll all be kind of pulled away. How do you see in the long term that being resolved, or is that just going to always be a problem?
I think the reality is there's always going to be competition for like the best people, and there's competition for talent pool. Like, I suppose what we can offer in terms of social enterprises is very impactful, meaningful for people who are very passionate about like taking action on climate change. They're the kind of people that we're targeting, recognizing that like the work is tough, it's not, and they are sacrificing perks of the job in terms of free beers on a Thursday, or foosball, or whatever, cat minding, or whatever there. So, but we have a great, within that we have a great team of people who are extremely committed and passionate. So like we have that in terms, as social enterprises, we have to really embrace that side and big it up. And another thing pre-COVID that we were really trying to offer was flexibility, but now that's kind of been offered by everybody. But we definitely, as social enterprises, I think the other reasons that people might go for a social enterprise over, say, a for-profit company would be flexibility. And I think that's where social enterprises could really try and attract staff. Flexibility, work-life balance, and like a role that you are making a really meaningful contribution to whatever area you're working in, whether it's social inclusion or climate change. So that's, I think, the selling point for social enterprises in terms of attracting people from the digital space. But it is tough because, in terms of retaining people, that might work for a year or two, but we have had, say, especially young graduates, they really want to work for a nonprofit and work with us for 2 or 3 years, get really good experience. But it's very tempting to go then for, to expand and change and grow. And as a small company, we can't necessarily offer those huge growth opportunities.
Yeah, we have 2 minutes before we go back to the main stage. So Emma, would you relate to that? Do you have any final thoughts?
No. Yeah, completely relate to what Aoibheann is saying, and there's kind of two other things that stand out for me. There's a beauty in the social enterprise space. Like, the gig is to also be entrepreneurial. So I think that's one of the other things, is that if you join a social enterprise, because we have to stay relevant and we have to stay on mission, there's an opportunity for people to be entrepreneurial within that role, and also to get to shape and develop their role. And there's a lot of companies, traditional companies, that you don't have that luxury. And we're seeing more and more young people, or everybody, that want to put a stamp on their role and want to be able to, just because you might have started in one role, 2 years ago, that there doesn't mean that you can't change and shape. So there is something around that. For Recreate, there's a freedom in being able to shape that role. But I think the other thing, we can't compete on good salaries. So it's really important that the organizational culture of a social enterprise is really there. So that means that the people in the warehouse, or on the cleaning team or whatever, are seeing the impact of the work, that isn't just the luxury of the senior managers or the creative team, that's the creative people get to see the sexy stuff, or they're out with the company. So I think that that culture, that everybody sees what the work is, because then you want to be part of that. And I think that well, for Recreating how I like to work, I think that that's key. So if you're in a social enterprise, then you're all part of that social business. So you should understand the different mechanisms, how it's all working. And maybe in more traditional companies, you don't. You're in your department and that's where you stay. So I think it's that bit, looking at the human side and saying, okay, what can we elevate here? So the entrepreneurial spirit, and to be flexible, and then that bit around really understanding what we're about.
Yeah, well, that's
a bit of charm, a bit of Irish charm, Cara.
That's a great piece of advice
yeah.
to take on. Well, thank you, Emma and Aoibheann, for this lovely discussion, and really positive, and gives me lots of hope for where we're headed. And thanks also to all our viewers, our growing audience there. So we're all going to head back to the main stage now, and you'll get a summary of what happened in the other breakout sessions, and Claire will tell you what to expect for tomorrow. So thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aoibheann.